today's SMART seminar with the amazing Dr. Nicholas Festivar. Our topic is, I keep wanting to say just keep it simple, stupid. Keep it simple, challenging complexity with self-organising software. So Nicola arrived here in February and is an Associate Research Fellow here at SMART, having achieved his PhD in Artificial Intelligence from the University of Toulouse in 2016. After 1 year as a temporary research and teaching assistant and a postdoctoral position at the University of Toulouse, he joined us, as I said earlier this year. His research interests focus on designing adaptive multi-agent systems to solve real-world complex problems. Domains of application are as various as robotics, smart cities, assisted living, or energy optimisation. And this wide range of problematics and applications involves interdisciplinary methods and innovative solutions to challenge the inherent complexity of a more and more connected world. I think I'm just going to learn so much today. And the blurb on what today's seminar is not simple. I'm just going to say it did not keep it simple, but I'm sure today we're going to learn how to do that. Welcome, Nicola.
Thank you. So, yeah, the idea of today was to really introduce a little bit of myself and to show what I've been doing over the last 8 years, 10 years. I'm starting to be old. My first hobby when I started studying, making some postdoctoral studies and so on, was not really to be a computer scientist. First, I wanted to be a mathematician. So, in my first years of mathematics studies, I discovered that when you want to learn mathematics, you first have to learn how to do things before knowing why you have to use those things. It didn't go very well with me. Fortunately, my first years was coupled between mathematics and informatics. And during my very first class of computer science, my teacher said something that was really amazing for me. He said that computer scientists are lazy. And that was exactly the kind of things I was seeking for, making a job in which I can be lazy. Then I've discovered that in laziness, there is strength. Because lazy is not about not doing things. It's about doing things the simplest way, doing simple things. And by doing simple things, you will gain strength. For example, what basic principles when you do code is don't repeat yourself. Don't write 2 times the same line of code. Try to factorize, write it only once. And by doing that, you will get some power, because you will be more able to control your code, test what is happening, understand what is happening, and when you have a chance to make, you do it only once, not twice, or even so on. So, main idea when you're a computer scientist is to make things as simple as possible. Being lazy, reuse what you can reuse. But one could think that simplicity does not allow you to make complex things. That's not true. Simplicity is the opposite of complicated, not the opposite of complexity. One quick example. A puzzle of 2,000 pieces is a really complicated problem. But you can always reduce this problem into a simple problem, in which you only have 2 pieces that you can or not connect one with the other. And by solving those small problems of 2 pieces, you can rid your problem. That's the reductionist approach. That's what we've been learned to do as engineers. Regarding a problem, split it in small pieces, simpler problem, and solve each problem individually. But when we look at complex problems, it's not possible. You have to have an holistic approach. You have to look at your system as a whole, and you cannot reduce it into some pieces of information. For example, if you want to make some bread, you need some wheat, some water, some salt, and another ingredient. Don't remember how to say it in English. If you remove one of these ingredients, you will have something else that's some bread. You cannot look at each ingredient individually. You have to take your bread and you reset it as a whole. So that's a complex problem. So what I've been doing, because I'm lazy, is I've not been designing pieces of computer software to solve problems. What I've been doing is that I've been designing high software that will solve the problem for me. Basic idea is that I'm not here to solve your problem, I'm here to design software that will solve the problem for you. And I try to do my job only once. Basically, my idea is for me to not be really useful only once, and then you can drop me. Fire me, you. So the pitch of today is about designing artificial intelligence software that will solve complex problems for you. And your job is not to solve complex problems, it's just to make simple things, simple rules. That's the whole idea, so making things simple. But first of all, why am I even talking about complexity and why complexity matters? If we look at the history of informatics very quickly, in the beginning of the 1980s, this funny guy here, I think he was working at the MIT, drew some kind of vision of what the computer of the 21st centuries will be. And he put the basic of what we call ambient system. Mainly the idea was that computer was switching from personal computers to ambient systems, so that the computing technology was moving to the environment, so the surrounding environment of everyone, and that it was merging, making a part of everyday life, managing different aspects. But mainly what the idea was to remove technology from computers and to put them into the environment. With the evolution of technology and internet, drastic reduction in the cost of electronics and hardware, increase in computation, this little dream is now a reality. And the very concept of smart city is all about that, putting informatics everywhere, managing different kind of assets, with here the specificity. Because at first we want to remove technology from people, putting it into the environment. Smart city is trying to connect back people to technology and to address citizen needs and community involvement. So you've seen that the first dream in the 1980s is becoming true, but we try now to have some kind of synergy between people and a more and more connected environment, more and more intelligent environment. Stuff we are doing here around the Internet of Things is of course a good illustration of complexity. Here you have a 3D model of buildings in which we have 125 sensors built by the two guys which are here. Thank you. Monitoring different aspects of indoor environment. So you can see even at the scale of the building here that we start to have a little bit of complexity, a lot of sensors, a lot of room. Monitoring something that is really complicated, the comfort, because we each have a specific definition of comfort. I like my room to be at 20 degrees, and another guy wanted to be at 22, even at 25, so that's complicated. But the Internet of Things is trying to address this problematic by enabling things to connect, to exchange, to share data. And that's what we've been doing here with the Things Network and NOAA, enabling everybody to connect the data, share it, and build some application of it. But of course, having this possibility to easily connect things, easily share data, easily build application, is a lot of challenge. Because no all applications will try to manage multiple assets. We are talking of energy, water, comfort, waste management, whatever. And in each of those applications, we need a lot of interdisciplinarity. And I'm a computer scientist. I'm not a physicist. I cannot do what physicists do. So I have to talk to physicists for managing energy. I'm not a biologist. I don't know what happens with biology. But as a computer scientist, I have to talk to those people. Another component of the system is that they are composed of various systems. We are not even talking of systems. And each of these systems was initially designed autonomously for a specific asset, and now they have to work together, or we can make the integration of those sets. Another component of complexity is that when you try to work in the field of smart city, you have to talk to politics and to take into account some social components, which are sometimes very complicated because they are not really clearly explained. Last of the example is the openness. When you talk about IoT, you can add some sensors, you can remove them, or you're going to deal with that. Because when you try to develop a software, and when you try to engineer things, the first thing you do is you collect the needs. You try to make a map of what is needed. And here, with those new kind of systems, we cannot really assess a priori all the interactions that will occur. We didn't know all the use case, we didn't know all the needs. We don't even know all the sensors that are going to be here. So that's a lot of trouble for us, because we cannot do engineering as we used to do. So the question is, okay, but Google is doing a lot of stuff in machine learning, a lot of people are using machine learning, so maybe machine learning could be a good solution to overcome complexity of this application. And remember, I didn't manage to get to be a mathematician, but I had to read what my machine do. And unfortunately, history told us that machine learning might not exactly be the solution. If we look at the history of complex artificial systems, there have been some work starting even before having some computers. Those three guys were mathematicians. And Turing is one of the fathers of the informatics, but he was mainly a mathematician. I've made a lot of work, and basically what we can sum up in this work is that they have shown that there are some problems which are undecidable. That means that we will not be able to find the general solution solving all those class of problems, except if we manage to make some reductions, so reduce this problem, or to use a more powerful theory. Basically, inventing something else than mathematics, more powerful than mathematics to prove mathematics. But okay, that's math. How does it rely with computer science? And there's one thing pretty simple that we know as computer scientists is that we can show the presence of bugs. We can make some tests. But we cannot show that there is no bugs. Are some people afraid of taking planes here? If it's the case, just close your ears. Because I'm just saying you that we cannot prove that the software is able to work correctly. So we cannot prove that that pen cannot crash. Okay, doesn't prevent us from taking planes. But that's a basic principle which is really strong. We will not be able to prove that there is no bug in no problem. And that is the limitation that we know and that we have to face. So what we've been doing is that because we cannot manually control what the system is doing, we've been building some control system in which we try to keep our system into a certain desired state. Then comes this guy, Ross Ashby, nice guy also, and he has proven something that says that the variety in the control system must be equal or larger than the variety of the perturbations. So, strong way to do it. Simple way to see it is that if you want to control a television in which you want to switch off channels, for each channel in your television, you need at least one button or one combination of buttons to switch to each channel. So the complexity of your television in number of states, in number of channels, if you want to control it, you need to build a system with at least the same level of complexity. So control is not a good way to reduce complexity. It's just one way to switch from one state to the other. And once again, here, when you design a control system, you will have no proof that your system is behaving well. So, okay. I told you that with the evolution of informatics, we cannot know those interactions that will occur. We don't really know all the state of our system. So, it's really complicated to control those things that we don't know. So, what people have been doing is that they have been switching from control to adaptive control, learning control, putting some machine learning with the idea that, okay, I don't know the state, but I can use machine learning to learn new states at runtime. Basically, using some objective function, which either try to maximize the reward or just to mimic a certain dynamic. Here comes this guy, another mathematician, and now we're starting to understand why mathematicians are not afraid of me, except you, Florent, of course. Come with this theorem, no free lunch theorem for search and optimization. Basically what he says is that we can design pieces of software, mathematics application, that can have strong performance in a very specific domain, very specific application. But if you use the same piece of software and you pass it to all the applications possible, you will have an average value of performance. So you can design optimization algorithm for a specific topic, but you won't be able to design an algorithm making optimization working on all the topics possible. So, okay, that's not really a problem. I can do this kind of application. And maybe if I made multiple applications like this for multiple problems, I can switch between one algorithm and the other regarding my application. Unfortunately, if you remember well, if you try to do that, so switching from one meta-heuristic to another meta-heuristic, you try to make an algorithm selection, you try to control one program which is here, which is your learning algorithm. And if you remember Ashby, what he has said is that complexity here is at least equal as the complexity here, but no, the complexity here is at least equal as the complexity here, and so on. So you're not reducing the complexity of your problem. You're just adding another layer of complexity and so on. making your problem even more difficult than what it was before. What's the impact of that in interfacial system? It's just that we are spending more and more time to design software that are really specific for a specific application. And we are doing that without even having the guarantee that all pieces of software are going to work. We spend more and more time for a specific application without this guarantee. So what I've been doing and what I've been working with the team, SMAC team at Toulouse, having a different way to handle complexity, by not looking at your problem, but instead looking at the components of your problem and how things are going to interact into it, and trying to manage the interaction between those things. That's the idea of self-organizing software. Here is a book covering the whole field, good books. And basically, the idea between the self-organization is that you will design a software that will dynamically change its structure. So basically, that will dynamically change the way its components are working during its execution at runtime and without having any external control. You try to design pieces of software that will change dynamically their behavior in order to maintain some functional adequacy. That's not something that is new, and it has not waiting computers to come for working, because we have a lot of examples in nature of self-organization. Hence, they are able to find the shorter path to food, and they don't have a lot of intelligence. They don't even communicate directly, but they can do it. Here, you got some termites building some huge buildings for nesting. And that one is just funny, just a bit of termite. And here you have some things which is called flocking, in which a flock of birds is able to fly, making full choreographies, and without bumping into itself. What's funny with nature is that even more complex things like this one can be described with only a simple set of rules. With only 3 rules, which are separation, alignment, and cohesion, we can build simulations of birds having the same kind level of complexity. But here you can see that each rule is quite simple, in fact. So simplicity is really not the opposite of complexity. Simplicity is a mean for complexity. And here, the complex pattern that you see is just the emergence of the fact that each bird is applying these rules and is in interaction one with its other. So the structures of this pattern is just a particular organization, and they are shifting this organization in order to satisfy this little set of rules. Okay, so why does it matter? One example, it's not new, once again, 1984, I was not even born at that time, is the Breitenberg vehicles are made by Valentino Breitenberg. I think he was a neurologist or sociologist, so not a mathematician this time. He made a little thought experiment in which you want to design some little robots, basic robots, in which you have 2 light sensors and 2 motors. And what he proposed is just by connecting 1 sensor to 1 motor and having a specific type of connection. For example, here, this motor is excited by the value of this sensor. He has shown that if you switch this connection, you can have different types of behavior. Just one quick example here. You have some, we have some robots. If I manage to do that, yes. You have here some robots which looks like they are attracted by the green spots. Basically, that's their food. And if I come with my mouse here, they look like they are afraid of me. They are fearing my mouse and then going back to the food. In fact, this behavior, there's nothing complicated in it. It's just the Breitenberg vehicles. They are attracted by the food only because the more the sensors is sensing food, the more the speed of the motor is going. And that's the opposite. The more they are sensing here my mouse, they are leaving. So this behavior can just be explained by a simple set of rules. But at a more macro level, when we look at this behavior, we tend to show that there are some emotions, that they are showing some very specific behaviors that we can describe maybe as coward, aggressive, sometimes self-lover, they want only to stay in the light, or explorer, They don't look at like they explore the environment. So basic rules, and we have some kinds of complex behavior, or at least some things that an external observer is explaining as a complex behavior. So here we can easily show that if this robot was able to change dynamically its connection, to change dynamically its organization, it will be able to change dynamically of behavior. And that's the basic principle of self-organizing software, and what we try to do is, we can change this internal organization in order to change the global behavior. And basically when we do that, we always have two kinds of levels. The level in which you have your system, and the level in which you try to experiment your function. Basically here are the birds, and birds are interacting with the others, and they each have a specific function. The collective results of the birds, which is the flocking, the shape of the collective and the choreography, is the emerging results of all those little functions in interaction, the one with the others. And so, if you just change the way those two birds are connecting, you will change your macro function. And all the challenge is how we can, at this micro level, control things to make things at this macro level. But the really thing that is beautiful with self-organizing software is that the complexity at this micro level is a lot simpler than what we try to do here. Because here, just a simple set of rules. Just 3 rules for the birds. Whereas here, if you want to control a flock of 1,000 or 1,000,000 birds, it's a lot more a complicated problem. So all my work is not to look at this function here, but to look at how we can design software like that will make emergent behavior. And for doing that, I've been using multi-agent systems. And maybe you know them here as agent-based models. Basically, the idea of using that is that when you try to design a system in which multiple entities are interacting within the same environment, you will be able to experiment them as agents. And their complexity is going to be a lot lower because you will just experiment with a little set of rules, basic rules that you can control and look at. And multi-agent system is an engineering techniques, methodology that has been applied for various complex problems, and it offers possibility to make a bottom-up design. Instead of looking directly at your problem, you look at the entities in your problem and you build upon that. But most of all, these systems are able to exhibit self-start properties, self-organization, self-resiliencies, self-learning, and so on. And here you see a basic simulation of ants in which here the collective patterns of ants is about to detect the shorter path to food. Once again, just by self-organization. More specifically, what I'm doing is applying a specific type of multi-agent system, which is called adaptive multi-agent system, which is a methodology to build a system with emergent features. And basically, it's mostly inspired by the way we are designing computer things. You start first by identifying what is your system, what is the environment, identifying this kind of interaction, so what do I can perceive from my system, and what kind of action of control I have on it. Then you identify what's happened within the system, so what will be my agents, birds for example, and all those agents are interacting the one with the others, and you describe what is happening when everything went well. That's the behavior of your system. You're basically describing a multi-agent system. But to enable self-organization, what you look is, okay, I have my system behaving normally, but there are some situations that can occur in which I will have some failures, things that is not going to work well. And for each of these failures, which is called non-cooperative situations, I will try to identify simple local rules to either anticipate those situations, they will not happen because I put these rules, or to repair them. Basic principles that we are using for doing that is the notion of cooperation. And you can see here those 2 little donkeys. If they don't cooperate, neither of us is going to eat. The either solution for them is to cooperate, first going to the first source of food, then going to the other. Basically the same idea that we try to apply. And what we make is that we have a classification of what type of non-cooperative situations that can occur regarding the life cycle of your agent. So, but basically the idea here is just that when you design your agent, you will try not to have some ambiguity in the signal. You will try that all your agents are going to talk the same kind of languages. And when they take decisions, they will try not to go into conflict, or not to make useless actions. And basically for doing that, you have three possibilities. Either your agent will tune its internal parameters by just changing some special values. Change its organization. I was working with you, now I'm working with you because of some rules, it's better for me to work with you. Or even some openness. We need two guys for taking this box. We had one guy at one time. Or there is one guy doing nothing, just kill him. And that's okay because we are in artificial systems, we can kill some people. I won't go any further on the methodology because what I wanted to show is to show that we can experiment a lot of problems using this methodology and even solve some complex ones. So let's give some examples, like some three. The first one, it was a real problem coming from the field of robotics, in which we wanted to have a robotic fleet monitoring a special area, for example, a building, and preventing it from thief. Basically, that was the idea. So you can have this rover moving in the room, and which have to look for any trace of infraction, or even take pictures of every people in the room. And the basic idea was that a robotic fleet can be composed of any number of robots. You can have 1 robot, 2 robots, 3 robots. And they can evolve in any type of environment. So how do you design an algorithm that will allow you to manage this robotic fleet? Which means that will allow you to monitor your building effectively and with the ability to take into account some emergency. For example, somebody has broken a door, or I can allocate my robots into this door without removing all my robots from my whole building. And this little problem has some challenges because we are trying to have some scalability. We want to design an algorithm that works no matter the number of robots. We want to design an algorithm that works no matter what type of environment do I have, if there are some walls or not, or whatever. And you also have to deal with unpredictable emergencies. You can't build a model of thieves predicting that a thief is going to go to a building, so you have to deal with this kind of emergency. And for that, we've been using a tool which is called criticality. And once again, it's just a simple idea. Is whenever you have a problem, tell me that you have a problem. But not only tell me, but tell me how difficult is your problem for you. I'm 10, you're 8. Because you're 8, you're more critical than me. Or the opposite, depending on where you experience. But just by this simple idea that you design a set of agents that can say when they have a problem, how difficult is this problem for them, and when you see that as another agent, you can decide or not to help him. You can decide to help him if you can take an action that will reduce the criticality of your fellow without affecting your own criticality. You are not selfish, but you are not altruist. You don't want to give your body to the other agents. What you try to do is always make the action that is the best for the collective. That's the idea of cooperation. And basically, it's just taking the action that will minimize the criticality of your neighborhood. Basic, simple idea. And if you apply it to the problem of surveillance, we have 2 types of agents, robots and cells, which are describing each area of your building or can describe a little subset of your building. And each cell is just going to say, I need to be visited. And I need to be visited as soon as possible. And they are experimenting this as a criticality. And basically, the most simple criticality you can have is just each time taps in not, if I have not been visited, I increase my criticality by 1. And the cells are collectively saying that I need to be visited, please come to see me. If there is an emergency, instead of having an increment of 1, they jump from an increment of 100. I really need to be visited. And that's just the job that cells are doing. Just saying to everybody, I need to be visited and experimenting it as a critical. So the problem for robots now, in artificial steps, to decide where do I want to go. And basically, here I have a cell saying that I really need to be visited, whereas here the cell don't need. So my robots can decide to go here. But cooperation is not only satisfying this cell, but is satisfying it in an effective way. And if we do that, 2 robots are going to go to the same place, whereas this one only needs to make 2 steps to go here, whereas this one needs at least 4 steps. Because this rover is cooperative, he will decide by himself not to go here because he knows that this rover is closer and is more effective for doing that, but will autonomously shift and go in here. That's the kind of rule you can apply. Simple rule, just looking at what is happening and making some rules to repair. And by doing that, my robots here autonomously are able to select in which kind of cells they can go. Let's show what is happening. So here are my little robots. If my cell is green, this means that it's not critical. And if my cell is red, it's pretty critical. Just a basic set of rules. And if I manage to make my video work. Common. Oh. Not a video. Assignation. Let's undo. So I start, everything is critical. And my rovers are moving into space. Just select. I'm not saying to each robot where you have to go. All I'm saying is how they can solve some basic little problems that they can have. And here you can see that my rovers are managing to share the space. And this little area here, we've made it a little more critical than the others. Instead of having an increment of 1, they have an increment of 2. And what you see is that there's some kind of strategy here. You always have one robot staying in this area. But that's not something that I have rated. Just an emergent feature that is emerging from just this little set of rules. And by doing so, I can change my environment. I can change my number of robots. I can add one, remove one. I can add wall. I can change my criticity. My job as computer scientist has been done only once. Designing this simple set of rules and leaving the system behaving for myself. Okay, but can we do something else than robots? Remember, I told you that I was not a mathematician, but I tried to do some mathematician problems. Linear optimization, common problem in which you have a set of variables and you have some constraint to solve. Easy problem here, of course, just for the example. You can transform this problem into a structural problem in which you have some constraint agents, which are monitoring the state of your constraints, and some variable agents. And they have an organization because x1 and x2 are linked to these constraints, and x1 and x3 are linked to this one. That's a structure. The problem is so, what value we can put to x1, x2, x3? As I'm lazy, I'm not going to do the job for my variables. What I'm doing is just putting some simple rules here to allow them to find this value. And the idea was that each constraint here is also able to estimate the criticality. Basically here, when my two variables are at 0, my constraint is solved, and I have a liberty of -2, because I am at 0, and 0 is 2 steps from 2. But here, I want this value here to be higher than 2. 0 plus 0 equals 0. I need to move from 2. And by having that, my agents here have some kind of feedback of what they can do. And the simple rules, once again, minimizing the criticality of the most constrained constraint, can be summed up just like that. Basically, I will increase if somebody asks me to increase, I will decrease if somebody asks me to decrease, or I will do nothing. And the way I'm selecting is based on what happens in my neighborhood. So, if I solve this problem, basically, my agent will go find a solution. Not explaining all the rules, but simple rules once again. And here, we have a problem that is solved, but this variable here can keep increasing. That's not a problem. But the good thing with having this done once, this simple set of rules, is that you can add at runtime a new constraint. And it does not change the behavior of your variables, it's just changing their neighborhood. And with this new constraint, your system can still manage to solve itself. So a simple set of rules, which is just what action will I be making, and which action is the most helpful for my neighborhood, allow to solve some linear optimization problems. You have here a full thesis in which it has been applied for optimizing the electric harness in an airplane. Big problem, taking 5 days for a team of engineers. No, it's working in a regular laptop at runtime. Just because we have switched the problem from a mathematical problem into an organizational problem, in which the problem is a lot simpler. I've been using this to make some detection of anomalies in context of elderly people. Basically, you have a set of sensors monitoring everyday life for the people, and in which you try to make simple classifier. This is an anomaly, this is not. And when you try to do that, you try in fact to find the good weights for each of your values. ID, using medical feedback, your system is making a detection, and if it's false or positive detection, you can transform this into simply a constraint. And by solving this this constraint, you can find the optimal weights. So here, from an initial problem of mathematics, which has been changed into a problem of organization, now I'm able to solve the problems of health. And I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a doctor, just a computer scientist trying to make simple rules. Good thing, we made some tests also to show how the system behaves regarding the number of sensors, and you see here, it's linear, which means no matter the number of sensors, your system will be able to solve it in a linear way. That's kind of what we do. Last example, it was the work that I done in my PhD thesis and after. Linear classification regression. Basic problem in machine learning in which you have two data sets, and you try to split this data set in two by either finding a linear equation or finding some kind of more complex operation. That's the stuff every machine learning algorithm is doing, just trying to split the data regarding some example. My idea was not to use strong mathematics, was not to use Google or to ask for a strong neural network. My idea was just to make some squares. Basically, what I've done is I've designed a set of simple rules in which, regarding any new example, I can draw some squares. And these squares are agents. Basically, when I have a new example, this new example is either mapped by an objective already existing agent, or if it's not, my agent is going to increase. If an example is badly mapped by an agent, this agent is going to decrease. And we can even have some squares that are going to be removed, and some squares that are going to be added. So, not going full in details, but here, basic set of rules in which I just create some squares and destroy them. Not in 2 dimensions, but in multi-dimension. I've designed a simple algorithm that has only, I think, 11 rules describing the behavior of a system that is able to do online learning in a multi-dimensional space. Dealing with the openness, I can add new inputs, new outputs. And that makes no a priori at all on what kind of system you're trying to control. So simple set of rules, and you can do some things that are really hard to do. Example of application, we've been applying it, and because we are lazy, but we also want to have some tests, to control Mario in 2 ways. One way by observing how people are playing to Mario and making a model of this, and the other way by optimizing the reward. Another example here, building models. We have 2 balls connecting by sensors and connecting to a sensor node, and we try to predict the position of the external ball in 50 steps. And here we have a model, self-tuning in real time, managing to do that. And those 2 systems here are controlled by exactly the same algorithm with no variation on it, just based on a simple set of rules. The model being the emergent results of those set of rules. But that's okay, we can control things, we can build some models, okay, that's things that neural networks can do. We can do it here with a lot of simplicity, but the real good thing with that is that we can look at how your system is organizing, how things are moving. And here you can see a 2D mapping of my square being created and the structures. By looking at that, because my rules are simple, I can try to understand what is happening, and I can, from the behavior of my system, detect that, for example, some variables are a lot more useful for my system than the others. And then I'm getting some knowledge from the structural organization of my systems. I'm able to extract knowledge that will be useful for me to detect that there's a missing variable. I need some more things in my system. Here you see my little rover, that was my main application during my PhD, which is collecting the box and putting it back to the blue area using a camera. So just sending basic information about the position of each artifact. And here you can say that the rover is collecting the box and bringing it to the blue box. But of course, it's not what it's doing. Just a bunch of squares, self-organizing, mapping a complex model, and the organization of these squares and the way we are doing them manages to control this rover. So, just to conclude, why I wanted to show you that today is because we spend lots more and more energy in designing applications that are really complex in specifics and using a lot of infrastructures. There's another way to do it, and my way is addressing complexity not by computational power, but by design. Not by looking at your problem, but by looking at the entity composing the problem, and all things are interactive. Second thing I wanted to tell you is that simplicity is not the opposite of complexity. You can design simple systems with complex behavior. And you should be designing simple systems because with simple systems, you will gain really real strengths. Self-organization, the idea is to deal with the dynamic of the systems. And it's not your job to adapt your system. Let's give this job to your system. And that's why artificial intelligence is good for making the stuff that is complicated for you. So design your system not to solve a specific problem, but design your system to let it solve this problem. And by doing that, you will gain some insight of what is happening, because you will be able to look at the organization of your system, and you will be able to extract useful knowledge about what is happening. In simple way, you can see for simplicity through locality, and you will be able to deal with complexity by emergence. Just a simple set of rules will produce complex behavior. Thank you.
Glad you kept that simple for me. Should all academics be as lazy as Nicholas, would be very well served. Any questions? Dan, if you like.
Well, if we took the example of your linear inequalities, the normal mathematical problem people would be trying to solve there is an optimization of global objective function which satisfies those inequalities that you have. So the normal way to do that would be with a simplex or revised simplex or something like that. So, but you didn't address the question of a global objective function there at all. And so what was the point of that linear inequality example?
So here in this little problem, the objective was just to find the values that solve the two constraints.
Sure.
But if you want to maximize something, it's just adding another constraint. Difference between this system and a simplex is that for doing a simplex, you need to have all constraints and all the variables of your system. But here with this basic set of rules, you can add at runtime new variable, new constraints. So you can even try to solve a problem without having all the information at runtime. And you can dynamically change one constraint. It does not need for you to change your system. Because what you design is just a heuristic to solve your problem. You can change your problem at runtime, and it will not change your solver. Whereas with a simplex, every time you try to apply it, you need to specify which are your constraints and which is your objective function. And if you change the objective function,
But you can add them if you want to, after you have a solution already.
Yeah.
The same as you can add another limit.
Yeah, but you need to reduce the whole process of solving. So it's taking some time for solve. Here, it's at runtime. It does not need to stop your system, it keeps going on. And it's just simple rules. And once again, simplex has been using for the aircraft. It needs 5 days. Here, it's done at runtime. So we are here more powerful system to deal with dynamics. Not convinced? That's okay. If you want, I can send you better paper describing the advantages of the method. But basically, it's just that you can add some constraint at runtime. It does not change the way you.
Can I also add something that it's also like this kind of computation is great when you have a lot of variables and a lot of constraints, because what those methods like simplex and like mathematical programmers are lacking behind is the time that's required to solve the problem, what if solutions are very fast at taking a very good solution in a short, in a reasonable amount of time. Like you sacrifice optimality by like
That's right. And here I've shown that it's linear, so there's no exponential time resolution time.
Robert?
Yeah, thanks for the wonderful presentation. On your conclusion, you missed the laziness part. On your conclusion, you missed the part about laziness.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's just good.
I
I've got
think
two
he
questions
proved
for
that he wasn't
you.
lazy.
I've got two questions for you, and it's just on working on this methodology. And, have you been able to identify, what domain areas or application areas that your methodology would work on, and what domain areas are not applicable? There are certain problems, for example, that you may not be able to address with methodology. Have you been able to identify that? So that's one question. The other question is, are there certain limitations, or constraints, limitations that would, from applying this methodology that you've been able to identify, to say if I'm going to do this, these are limitations, these are issues that would, generally pop up with using it.
So, okay, so two questions more about methodology and applicability. First, in the applicability, the idea of my previous team was that basically it's applicable to any kind of problem. So what they try to do is to apply it to every problem. And whenever they will find a problem in which it's not working, they will have some insight of what are the limitations. But basically what we say is, because we are lazy once again, we try to apply it in situations in which there is no already existing solution that is satisfying. And most of the problems that we face is the openness, in which you don't know what will happen in your system because there is a certain dynamics and you have to at one time adapt to this dynamics. So it's mainly done for dealing with dynamics and openness. But in terms of application, we've been working on predicting energy from air turbines, working on system of systems, working in airs, robotics, whatever kind of application, in fact, because you are not looking really at the application, but you're looking at trying to solve problems. And by solving problems, in fact, you can apply this kind of problems to a lot of applications. And that's maybe the strength with machine learning and stuff like that, is that we are solving problems and not solving applications. So that was the first question. There was another one regarding the limitations. I will not escape from the limitation of mathematics. With my solver, I also have some problems of local minimums and stuff like that. But we are just doing it in another way, in which it's more simple for us to control things, dealing with the dynamics, and extracting knowledge from it. So it's more all about making things simpler. And for you, you will be able to reuse it in a whole bunch of applications than adding a strict method to solve problems. Because if you remember well, I do not believe that we will ever have such kind of strict method. Just have to learn a new way to do things.
It reminds me of particle swarm optimization and artificial decoupling. What's the similarities or differences?
Particle swarm or all kind of swarm algorithms are class of self-organization. Only difference is that they are experimenting it using physics as baseline. Means more system theory and interaction. So that's the same kind of systems. Only thing is that here theory comes from computer science and use mainly UML to describe the system and so on. So just theory coming from computer science. But that's exactly the same kind of systems. And because you're using physics, you're relying on mathematics and you have the same limitation of mathematics. So.
Yeah, it's very interesting topic, and I have two questions. One question you mentioned that makes the rules simple. I noticed that the rules you use in your application or example is very important. Now, the first question is how to find the right rules in the system to make it simple.
Complicated question, no easy solution. Just try and see. That's still computer science, so you can still use the tools of computing. So making some test unit, testing some kind of synthetic environments. Basically, you try and guess and and identifying which kind of problem is trying to solve. So what we've been doing is also to try to identify some class of problem in which we can apply some kind of patterns, but there's still some work to do.
Yeah. And my second question is from this also. And there's a very old game very popular in Eastern Asian countries, the Go game. As a research, I remember at the beginning, most of computer Go game based on the self-organization, but the progress is very slow. 2 years ago, and AlphaGo based on deep learning and reinforcement learning. So do you have any comments on this?
Oh, a lot of comments about that. There's something called, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce it well in English because I don't pronounce it well in French. Because we call it Moravec paradigm, whatever.
Yeah.
The idea is that tasks that has been for computers and reciprocally tasks that have been designed for computers are not good for humans. And Go is a game for humans. So you're trying to solve a game that has been designed for humans using the computers. And computers doesn't have the same sensing capacities. And that's not really how you should address it. There's a nice book which is called The Way the Body Shapes the Way We Think, in which the writer tried to highlight the idea that depending on what are you sensing and acting capacities, is the way you are learning things is completely different. And most of the time you can even do something without even learning. So AlphaGo is, of course, a successful thing and so on, but they try just to solve a problem that is not made for machine, so the problem for humans. And they are solving it not by having something new, because if you look at the software itself, it's just a neural network that exists since the 80s. They just have the capacity to use a lot of computational power. And if we just think about that, about how much data centers they need to run AlphaGo, how much time they have spent to do it, and if we don't just want to do that in world building with 125 sensors, you basically need a power plant for just this kind of application. So I think that neural networks and AlphaGo have some kind of good application when you try to challenge problems at the world scale, but it's not a good way to solve your challenges because you rely on a lot of energy in terms of electricity, but also a lot of energy in terms of engineering.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Please stay and mingle for a little bit, have a biscuit and a cup of tea, and join me in thanking Nicholas for his presentation.